Hi, everybody. This is literature for Tuesday, April 7th. You were to read the second half of Phaethon and take the quiz before um, watching the video. So if you haven't done that, do both those things. Read the second part of Phaethon and take the quiz on the second part of Phaethon. You could pause the video while you're doing that and then come back to it and watch it, the video, after you're done with both those things. Okay, so things, to summarize, things go pretty well as Phaethon takes out and off in the chariot, because the horses are kind of used to hauling the chariot anyway, so they kind of go on automatic. But it occurs to Phaethon that from the ground, it probably just looks like it does every day, and everybody assumes that Apollo's running the chariot. And he wants his mother and his sisters, and especially Epaphras, to know that it's him. So he makes the horses go down. And this does not have good effects. The sun too close to the earth makes everything burn. The roofs of his village start to burn. He realizes that there's going to be, damage. So he makes the horses go back up. But he misses the middle path and they go too far up. And when that happens, everything freezes. He's struggling now for control. He makes them go back down again, but too far again. And all the ice melts and there are floods all over the place. So it's just one mess after another. Then he kind of loses control almost completely and they just go wild. And Zeus sees what's happening and he hears the cries from Earth that all this, that's going on. Looks down and sees it's not Apollo driving the chariot. So he flings one of his thunderbolts, zaps Phaethon, who falls from the chariot like a falling star. And the horses, now feeling that there's nobody driving them, they go back to the middle path and head back to the stables. Phaethon's yellow-haired sisters grieve for him and won't stop grieving, so Apollo finally, they're grieving by the river, so Apollo changes them into poplar trees. And ever since then, only Apollo has been allowed to drive the sun chariot. And back down on Earth, there are still some remembrances of Apollo's wild ride. The mountains still rumble. The ends of the earth are covered with ice caps. The mountains still rumble, trying to spit out fire. The fire started in their bellies by the diving sun. So Apollo knew that there would be trouble, but of course he had sworn by the river Styx, so he couldn't help but keep his promise. Okay, and back to the adventures of Ulysses for our chapter for today called Keeper of the Winds. Now the black ships beat their way northward from the land of the Cyclops, and Ulysses, ignorant of the mighty curse that the blind giant had fastened upon him, was beginning to hope that they might have fair sailing the rest of the way home. So impatient was he that he took the helm himself and kept it night and day, although his sailors pleaded with him to take some rest. But he was wild with eagerness to get home to his wife Penelope and to his young son Telemachus, and to the dear land of Ithaca that he hadn't seen for more than 10 years. At the end of the third night, just as the first light was straining the sky, he saw something pretty strange, a wall of bronze, tall and wide, floating on the sea, blocking their way. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, and he rubbed his eyes and looked again. But yeah, there it was, a towering, bright wall of beaten bronze. Well, he thought to himself, it cannot stretch across the sea. There must be some way to sail around it. He began to sail along the wall as though it were a shore of an island, trying to find his way around it. Finally, he came to a huge gate. Even as he gazed upon it in amazement, the gate swung open and the wind changed abruptly. The shrouds snapped, the sails bulged, the masts groaned, and all three ships of the fleet were blown through the gate, which immediately clanged shut behind him. Once inside the wall, the wind fell off, and Ulysses found his ship drifting toward a beautiful hilly island. Suddenly there was a great howling of the wind. The sun was blown out like a candle. Darkness fell upon the waters. Ulysses felt the decks leap beneath him as the ship was lifted half out of the water by a ferocious gust and hurled through the blackness. He tried to shout, but his breath was torn from his mouth and he lost consciousness. Ulysses had no way of knowing this, but the mischievous Poseidon had guided his ships to the island fortress of Aeolus, who was the keeper of the winds. Ages before, when the world was very new, the gods had become fearful of the terrible strength of the winds, and decided to tame them. So Zeus and Poseidon, working together, had floated an island upon the sea and girded it about with a mighty bronze wall. Then they set a mountain upon the island and hollowed out the mountain until it was a huge stone dungeon. Inside this hollow mountain they stuffed the struggling winds and appointed Aeolus as their jailer. And there the winds were held captive. Whenever the gods wanted to stir up a storm and needed a particular wind, they sent a message to Aeolus, who would draw his sword and stab that side of the mountain, making a hole big enough for the wind to fly through. If the north wind was wanted, he stabbed the north side of the mountain, its east slope for the east wind, and so on. When the storm was done, he would whistle the wind back home, and the huge brawling gale, broken by its imprisonment, would crawl back whimpering to its hole. Aeolus was an enormously fat demigod with a long, wind-tangled beard and a red and wind-beaten face. He loved to eat and drink and fight and play games and hear stories. 12 children he had, 6 boys and 6 girls. He sent them out one by one, riding the backs of the winds around the world, managing the weather for each month. So 12 kids, one for each month. And it was in the great castle of Aeolus that Ulysses and his men found themselves when they awoke from their enchanted sleep. Invisible hands held torches for them, guided them to the baths, anointed them with oil, and gave them fresh clothing. Then the floating torches led them to the dining hall, where they were greeted by Aeolus and his 12 handsome children. A mighty banquet was laid before them, and they ate like starved men. Then Aeolus said, "Strangers, you are my guests, uninvited, but guests all the same. By the look of you, you have had an adventure and should have fine stories to tell. Yes, I love a tale full of fighting and blood and tricks, and if you have such tales to tell, then I shall entertain you royally. But if you are such men as sit dumb, glowering, unwilling to please, using your mouths only to stuff food into, well, then you are apt to find things less pleasant for you. You, Captain," he roared, pointing at Ulysses. "You, sir, I take you for the leader of this somewhat motley crew. Do you have a story to tell?" "For those who know how to listen, I have a tale to tell," said Ulysses. "Your name?" "Ulysses, of Ithaca." Yes," said Aeolus, "I seem to recognize that name. Believe I heard it on Olympus while my uncles and aunts up there were quarreling about some little skirmish they had interested themselves in near Troy, I think it was." "Yes. Were you there?" "I was there," said Ulysses. "I was there for 10 years, dear host, and indeed took part in some of the petty skirmishing that will be spoken of by men who love courage when this bronze wall and this island and you and yours have vanished under the sea and have been forgotten for 1,000 years. I am Ulysses. My companions before Troy were Achilles, Menelaus, Agamemnon, mighty heroes all, and in modesty I was not the least among them." "Yes," said Aeolus, "you are bold enough. Too bold for your own good, perhaps. But you've caught my attention now, Captain. I am listening. Tell on." Then Ulysses told of the Trojan War and of the abduction of Helen and the chase and the great battles, the attacks, the retreats, the separate duels. He spoke of Achilles fighting Hector and killing him with a spear thrust, of Paris ambushing Achilles. Finally, how he himself had made a great hollow wooden horse and had the Greek armies pretend to leave only to sneak back and hide in the belly of the horse. He told how the Trojans had dragged the horse within their gates and how the Greek warriors had crept out at night and taken the city and slaughtered their enemies. Aeolus shouted with laughter as he listened. His face blazed and his belly shook. "That's a trick after my own heart," he said. "You're a sharp one, you are. I knew you had a foxy look about you. Wooden horse. Ha! Well, tell me more, tell me more." Then Ulysses told of his wanderings after the fall of Troy and of his adventure in Lotus Land, and what had happened to the Cyclops cave. And when Aeolus heard how he had outwitted Polyphemus and blinded his single eye, he struck the table with a mighty blow of his fist and shouted, "That's marvelous! That's a master stroke! By the gods, you are the bravest, craftiest warrior that has ever drunk my wine." He was especially pleased because he had always hated Polyphemus. He had no way of knowing, of course, that the blinded Cyclops had prayed to his father, laid a curse on Ulysses, and that he, Aeolus, was being made the instrument of that curse. He did not know this, for the gods move in mysterious ways, and so he roared with laughter and shouted, "You have pleased me, Ulysses. You have told me a brave tale, a tale full of blood and tricks. And now I shall grant you any favor within my power. Speak out, Ulysses, ask what you will." "But one thing I ask, generous Aeolus," said Ulysses, "your help. I need your help in getting home, for it's been a long, weary time since we saw our homes and our families. Our hearts thirst for the sights of Ithaca. No one can help you better than I, said Aeolus. You sail on ships. I am the keeper of the winds. Come with me. He led Ulysses out into the night. A hot orange moon rode low in the sky. They could see without torches. Aeolus led him to the mountain, carrying his sword in one hand and a great leather bag in the other. He grabbed the side of the mountain. There was a rushing, sobbing sound. He clapped his leather bag over the hole, and Ulysses, amazed, saw the great bag flutter and fill. Aeolus held its neck closed, strode to the east face of the mountain, stabbed again. As the east wind rushed out, he caught it in the sack. Then he stomped to the south slope and stabbed again and again the sea, and caught the south wind in the sack. Now, very carefully, he wound a silver wire around the neck of the sack. It was full now, swollen, tugging at his arm like a huge leather balloon trying to fly away. He said, in this bag are the north wind, the south wind, and the east wind. You must keep them prisoner. But if you wish to change your course, if a pirate should chase you, say, or a sea monster, or if an adventure beckons, then you open the bag very carefully, you and you alone, Captain, and whistle up the wind that you wish. Let just a breath of it out, close the bag quickly again, and tie it tight, for winds grow swiftly. That's their secret, so they must be carefully guarded. I shall not change my course, said Ulysses. No matter what enemy threatens, what adventure beckons, I shall sail straight for Ithaca. I shall not even open your bag of winds. Good, said Aeolus, then bind it to your mast and guard it yourself, sword in hand. Let none of your men approach, lest they open it unwittingly. In the meantime, I will send the gentle west wind to follow your ship and fill your sails and take you home. Thank you, great Aeolus, Ulysses said. Thank you, kindly keeper of the winds. I know now that the gods have answered my prayers, and I shall be able to cease this weary, heartbreaking drifting over the face of the sea, having my men killed and eaten, my ships destroyed, and my hopes shattered. I will never cease thanking you, Aeolus, till the day I die. May that sad occasion be far off, said Aeolus politely. Now, sir, much as I like your company, you had better gather your men and be off. I shall be uneasy now until my winds return to me, and I can shut them back into the mountain again. Ulysses returned to the castle and called together his men. Gladly they trooped down to the ships and went aboard. Ulysses bound the great leather sack to the mast and warned his crew that no man may touch it on pain of death. Then he himself stood with naked sword under the mast, guarding the sack. Up anchor, he cried. The west wind rolled off the mountain and filled their sails. The black ships slipped out of the harbor. Away from the island they sailed, away from the mountain, the castle, toward the wall of bronze. When they reached the wall, the great gate swung open. They sailed westward, over water oily with moonlight. Westward they sailed for 9 days and 9 nights. In perfect weather they skimmed along, the west wind hovering behind them, keeping their sails full, pushing them steadily for home. And for 9 nights and 9 days, Ulysses didn't sleep. He didn't close his eyes or sheath his sword. He kept his station under the mast. Food and drink were brought to him there. Never for an instant stopped guarding the sack. Then finally, on the morning of the 9th day, he heard the lookout cry out, "Land ho!" and strained his eyes to see. What he saw made his heart swell. Tears coursed down his face, but they were tears of joy, for he saw the dear familiar hills of home. He saw the brown fields of Ithaca, the twisted olive trees, and as he watched, he saw them even more clearly. Saw the white marble columns of his own castle on the cliff, and his men, watching, saw the smoke rising from their own chimneys. When Ulysses saw the white columns of the palace, he knew that unless the west wind failed, they would be home in an hour. But the friendly wind blew steadily as ever. Ulysses heaved a great sigh. The terrible tension that had kept him awake for 9 days and 9 nights eased its grip. He raised his arms and yawned. Then he leaned against the mast and closed his eyes, just for a minute. 2 of the men standing in the bow saw him slump at the foot of the mast, fast asleep. Their eyes traveled up the mast to the great leather bag, as plump as a balloon, straining against its bonds as the impatient winds wrestled inside. Then Poseidon, swimming invisibly alongside, clinked his golden amulets, like his wristlets. The men heard the clinking and thought it came from the bag. One man said to the other, "Did you hear that? There are coins in there, heavy gold coins, clinking against each other. There must be a fortune in that sack." The other man said, "Yes, it's a fortune that should belong to all of us by rights. We share the danger, we should share the loot." "That's true," said the first. "That has always been that it's true," said the first, "that he has always been generous," meaning Ulysses. "He shared the spoils of Troy." "Yes, but what then? Why does he not divide this great sack of treasure?" Aeolus gave it to him, and we know how rich he is. Aeolus gave it to him as a guest gift, and he should share it with us. He never will. Whatever's in the bag, he does not mean for us to see it. Did you not observe how he's been guarding it all these nights and all these days, standing there always, eating and drinking where he stands, never sheathing his sword? Well, it's in its sheath now, said the second sailor, and his eyes are closed. Look, he sleeps like a baby. I doubt that anything would wake him up. What are you doing? What are you going to do with that knife? Are you out of your mind? Yes, out of my mind with curiosity, out of my mind with gold fever, if you must know. Ulysses lies asleep, his sword sleeps in its sheath. All I mean to do is see what's in the bag. Wait, I'll help you, but you must give me half of it. Come then. Swiftly and silently, the two barefooted sailors padded the mast, slashed the rope that bound the bag to the spar, bore it away. Hurry, open it. I can't. The wire is twisted in a strange knot. Perhaps it's a magic knot. It won't come open. Then we'll do it this way, cried the sailor with the knife, and struck at the leather bag, slashing it open. He was immediately lifted off his feet and blown like a leaf off the deck and into the sea as the winds rushed howling out of the bag and began to chase each other around the ship. The winds screamed and jeered and laughed, growing, leaping, reveling in their freedom, roaring and squabbling, screeching around and around the ship. They fell on their gentle brother, the west wind, and cuffed him mercilessly until he fled. Then they chased each other around the ship again, spinning it like a cork in the whirlpool. Then, as they heard the far summoning whistle of the keeper of the winds, far, far to the west on the Aeolian island, they snarled with rage and roared boisterously home, snatching the ships along with them, ripping their sails to shreds, snapping their masts like twigs, and hurling the splintered hulls westward over the boiling sea. So they're going to end up where they started out, back by the keeper of the winds. Ulysses awoke from his sleep to find the blue sky black with clouds and his home island dropping far astern, out of sight. He saw his crew flung about on the decks like dolls, the tattered sails, the broken spars. He didn't know whether he was awake or asleep, whether this was some nightmare of loss, or whether he was awake now and had slept before, dreaming a fair dream of home. Whatever it was, he began to understand he was being made the plaything of greater powers. With the unleashed winds screaming behind him at gale force, and the trip back to where they had started took them only 2 days. Once again, the black ships were hurled onto the island of the winds. Ulysses left his crew on the beach and went to the castle. He found Aeolus in his throne room and stood before him, bruised, bloodied, clothes torn, eyes like ashes. What happened? Cried Aeolus. Why have you come back? I was betrayed, said Ulysses, betrayed by sleep, the most cruel sleep of my life, and then by a wicked, foolish, greedy crew who released the winds from the sack and let us be snatched back from happiness, even as we saw the smoke rising from our own chimneys. I warned you, said Aeolus. I warned you not to let anyone touch the bag. And you were right, 1,000 times right, said Ulysses. Be generous once again. You can heal my woes, and you alone. Renew your gift. Lend me the west wind to bear me home again. I swear to you that this time I shall do everything you bid. I can't help you, said Aeolus. No one can help the one whom the gods detest. They detest you, man. They hate you. What you call bad luck is their hatred, turning gift into punishment and fair hopes into nightmares. Bad luck is very catching, so please go. Get on your ship and sail away from this island and never return. Farewell, said Ulysses, and he strode away. He gathered his weary men and made them board the ships again. The winds were pent in their mountains. The sea was sluggish. A heavy calm lay over the harbor. They had to row on their broken stumps of oars, crawling like beetles over the gray water. They rowed away from the island through the bronze gate and out upon the sullen sea. And Ulysses, heartbroken, almost dead of grief, tried to hide his feelings from the men, stood on the deck barking orders, making them mend sail and patch hull, rig new spars and keep rowing. He took the helm himself and swung the tiller, pointing the bow westward toward home, which once again lay at the other end of the sea. To get so close and yet not get there. Kind of sad. Okay, so for tomorrow, I think you're reading Orpheus. I think that's the next one. Sure. Yes. So read the myth Orpheus, read the whole thing, take the quiz, and then you can watch the video on that tomorrow on Wednesday. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your day.